So it is 10:30, and good morning to Lisa in Ottawa as well. Welcome to, for those of you that are just hopping on, welcome to a practical walkthrough of your WHMIS and chemical exposure list. If you jump in later, it doesn't show up in the chat. Can you repost it, please? Did we post the link to the?
Yes, and there'll be a link in the slideshow as well. But
Okay.
Jessica, who is working behind the scenes, I'll ask her to post it again so it pops up again so you can see it. It is at the beginning of the chat, but if you're
Yeah.
having trouble seeing it, we'll post it again in the chat. Thanks, Jessica.
Perfect. So we'll get there. Don't worry. Same thing with the demographic survey. The demographic survey is popped up at the beginning. So let's get into some basic housekeeping here. So let's get to know each other a little bit better in a couple of moments. First, we're going to talk about the demographic survey. So we have, and you can click on the link on the screen, or you can use the QR code that's visible. This is a survey that is optional but highly appreciated. What it asks is not questions about you as an individual. It's not your personal information. It's demographic information, like where in the province you're joining us from, specifically the county that you're joining us from, the county or city, what languages do you speak at home, how old are you, not like I am X years old. It's like we have age ranges from like I'm 25 to 55, like that's a very wide age range. So yeah, it's not your personal data. What this is used for is we collect this information on behalf of the MLITSD, and we aggregate it with all kinds of other data, all the other sessions that we do. But it's great to be able to see, for instance, that, maybe we have lots of folks that are joining us in Northwestern Ontario. Maybe we need more resourcing in Northwestern Ontario to ensure that businesses are adequately supported. Maybe we need to have more resources available in Ukrainian, because we have a lot of folks that speak Ukrainian at home. If that's something that we need to do to kind of meet folks where they're at, get that safety message out, that's really what this is all about, is ensuring that we're helping to support businesses where they are and in the best ways that we can. Right, so function number is 232321. Again, that doesn't identify you. It just shows that, we were able to see what proportion of folks were able to answer the demographic survey. So if you have already answered it, thank you so much. And if you have not, please take a moment to do so. It is, again, optional, but highly appreciated because the data is so valuable to helping support our Ontario workplaces. So for those of you that are new to Safety Connection, just a heads up that your audio comes through your computer. You could use a phone conference if you're having audio issues. Your mic will stay muted, your camera will stay off. That's because this is a Safety Connection. But all of the interaction is in the chat. So you can go ahead and drop questions, and we take questions through the entire session. I'll be monitoring the chat. Tony, as she's going through the checklist, I'll be monitoring the chat continuously. So if you pop questions into it, don't wait to the end. If you're like, oh, I'll wait until we're finished at the end, don't bother. We can take your moment while the question is still fresh, and we can hopefully get an answer while the question is still fresh too. I will also just quickly mention that we have reactions. We might say something that's like funny. You can hit the laughing face or the like, what face. There might be some surprises as you go through the checklist of things that you may not have thought of for your chemicals. We have polls. I don't know if we have any here in the session today, but if we do, they pop up in front of your screen. You hit an answer. You have to hit submit for it to submit. Once you do, you can close the window and you're back into the program. And last, for the chat, you open the speech bubble, click that. It opens up a window on the right-hand side. It has a box at the bottom that says type a message. You type a message, you hit enter, everyone can see it. Obviously, for the chat, we want to keep this on topic, as well as SFW, that is safe for work. We also have some accessibility features here for you in our program. If you are looking for live captions, you can click on the 3 dots. That's the More menu. Go to Language and Speech, and you can turn on live captions. These are auto-generated by AI, so if it goes a little purple monkey dishwasher on you and you think, wow, did Tony really just say that? It is entirely possible that Tony did not, in fact, just say that. But AI thought she said that. And second, we have our full screen option. If you'd like to you won't be able to see the chat or our smiling faces, but you do get a larger font experience. To do that, you go to view, you go to full screen, and to get out of that view, you simply hit escape. So what's a safety connection? A safety connection is an opportunity to learn, share. Yeah, so the 6-digit number was, and thank you for doing the demographic survey. It is much appreciated. It is 232321 for today's session. I just dropped that in the chat for you. So what is a safety connection? A safety connection is an opportunity to be able to learn, share, and discover what's of value to you. I like to think about it as picking out the nuggets of gold. So as we go through the session, Tony might be talking, for instance, about flammable liquids a little bit, or might be talking about how you're choosing your personal protective equipment. You know, we know that some personal protective equipment, some types of gloves, some types of clothing are good for one type of chemical and not so good for another. And that might be a great nugget of gold for you. Perhaps you're providing gloves, but you haven't thought too much about the material that those gloves are in fact made of and whether it's appropriate for the chemical products that you're working with. On the flip side, perhaps we get into a conversation, for instance, about respirators that are supplied with air. And you think to yourself, well, you know what? We don't have a supplied air respirator. We have a filtering respirator. So maybe that won't be a nugget of gold for you because it's not applicable to your workplace. But I'm confident with all of what this fantastic checklist has that there's going to be a few nuggets of gold in here for everyone. It's also an opportunity to connect with industry peers, to discuss hot health and safety topics, and to provide an opportunity for you to attend in your personal workspace. So regardless of where you are in our beautiful province, you're able to join in, whether you are, as far afield as Atikokan or Fort Francis. You can join in Cornwall. You can join in Thunder Bay. You could be joining in, Nipigon, in Windsor, in Sarnia. No matter where you are, you're able to be here with us today, which is very exciting. And we'll also be talking about some best practices. What are you doing well with your chemicals? You know, we all have those things that we're great at, and we can share those with others. I'm also going to quickly just mention that I am in Eastern Ontario. I am in Ottawa. We are currently getting a freezing rainstorm. Tony is here with you as well. And while I've got power right now, in the event that I disappear, don't worry. I'll hop back in on my phone, and Tony is here. So go team. Go team freezing rain. So that's a little bit about where I'm at. Just in case you notice that I'm like poof gone. That would be why. Okay, so let's get to know each other a little bit better. I'll go ahead and introduce myself, and then I'm going to be passing this session off. Actually, I think I'm up first. So I'll go ahead and let Tony introduce herself first, and then I'll pick up, and then we'll be switching back. So, Tony, tell us a little bit more about yourself. It's so great to work with you again.
Okay, thanks, Tova. Yes, I am a specialized consultant in occupational hygiene at WSPS. I've been working at WSPS for over 25 years now. Started as general health and safety consultant, so was a great time to look at all the safety issues and provided a bunch of different services like training for your Joint Health and Safety Committee, WHMIS training, hazard assessments, and then super excited to earn my CIH designation in 2019, where now I am focusing on our hygiene services. So we'll go out and do the air sampling, noise sampling, help people with the respirator protection program development or fit testing. So those kinds of things is where I'm spending most of my time. So super excited to be able to help develop this a new checklist, which is quite exciting that we'll go through today. So thanks, Tova.
Awesome. Yeah, and for those of you who have just joined us, feel free to drop into the chat where you're joining from, what sector you're joining from as well. Many of you have already done that, and thank you so much. It also allows us to get a sense of who's in the room, not only who we're touching here in the province, but also when we know about the sectors that you're working in. If you're working in agriculture, Tony may have some really specific advice talking about agriculture specifically, or perhaps we've got lots of folks in manufacturing. There are different implications for different industries in terms of, some of the products you might be using, there are different regulations. Some of you might fall under industrial establishments, some of you may not. So welcome to practical walkthrough of your WHMIS and Chemical Exposure Checklist. I'm Tova. I'm a health and safety consultant based in Ottawa. And my background is in laboratory chemistry. So I used to work as a research chemist developing drug patches with nanotubes. I got into health and safety because I got hurt at work. And so chemical safety is very much top of mind for me. It's one of my areas of specialty. So I'm excited to be working with Tony from the hygiene team on this webinar. And I've also had an opportunity over the course of the last couple of months to go out and do some of these walkthroughs with some of our customers and seeing where they're succeeding, seeing where perhaps they're struggling a little bit with how they're managing their chemicals currently. That's a little bit about me and why I'm here today. So I'm going to pass things to Tony now, who's going to pick up and start talking about why we developed the checklist and why there's such an effort being placed on chemical exposure here in the workplace. So over to Tony.
Great. Thanks, Tova. And I'm so appreciative that you're here with me today to help answer all those potential questions that might be popping up into the chat. And I definitely appreciate your expertise, Tova, with this topic. So good morning, everyone, and thanks for attending today's session. And thanking everyone really for all of your efforts in ensuring that your workplaces are not only compliant with the legislation, but also I'm sure you're all doing everything you can to prevent workplace injuries and illnesses in your workplace. Right. And so today we are focusing right in on chemical hazards, and we'll walk through the new checklist that we have developed. And why we did it was, again, to support the MLITSD's occupational hygiene campaigns, which you've probably heard about. There's really two still running. The first, it's called the WHMIS training, based on the amended hazardous products regulation. And that's really enforcement of Regulation 860, our WHMIS regulation. And the second campaign is on worker exposure to chemical agents in the workplace. And that is really just enforcing Regulation 833, which is control of exposure to biological or chemical agents. So the checklist we developed really pulls from these two legislative requirements, these regulations, but we also wanted to pull in Regulation 851, the industrial establishments regulation, because it also points out different but complementary requirements around chemicals. So we pulled in information from that as well. So just quick, why the effort? Why are we doing this? Why is the ministry focusing on these hygiene campaigns? Well, here is an updated chart, which I just pulled last week from the WSIB website, regarding the allowed fatality claims over the past several years. So blue at the bottom is the traumatic fatalities, and the gray is the occupational disease fatalities. Green was related to COVID fatalities. Okay, so the ministry also reports on their website that occupational diseases are the leading cause of worker deaths. So exposure to hazardous chemical agents in the workplace may result in the workers developing an occupational illness. So all the efforts that you put in identifying, assessing, and controlling these exposures to hazardous chemicals will absolutely help lower the risk of workers to developing an occupational disease and potentially even a fatality. So again, thank you for all of the efforts that you make. Our agenda for the rest of the morning here is that we'll take the time to review the checklist in detail. So I'll walk through each question and do my best to explain it. There's 36 questions in total. And I'll also just point out, we have guidance notes at the bottom of that checklist. They're there to support you. I won't have time today to go through all of those things, but they are some good notes that I added there to help explain what the question's asking for, or try to, frequently asked questions. We try to think of them and I popped them in there. As Tova mentioned earlier, definitely please put your questions in the chat as we go, because I know Tova is fantastic at looking at those and hopefully can answer your questions today during the session. But of course, at the end of the session, if we haven't answered your questions or you think of something later, you can always email Tova and I, because that's our job. We want to support you and help you get the answers you need to keep your workplace safe. And I also wanted to mention, and we will at the end, there is additional WSPS support for you. So you can have a consultant come into your workplace if you like, and we can review the checklist with you, and even walk around your facility like Tova and I have already done, using this checklist and just looking at the physical workplace and seeing how you're managing things and helping you look for opportunities for improvement. And also wanted to note that we have a part 2 to this session that's been scheduled for March 31st. So this is kind of a new thing for me, at least, that we're trying to offer a part B to the course. So the idea is, after you've had a chance to go through this checklist for your workplace, we're offering a follow-up session to really give an opportunity for you to jump back on and ask us any questions that came up, review any challenges you've had and successes, because we'd love to hear how this went and if there's opportunities for us to improve the tools to help this be useful for you. So our first poll question of today was just a quick, what industry do you work in? So if you wanted to pop in one of the categories for us, you click the which one applies to you and then hit submit, and it will populate, and you can likely see in the chat as it gets populated. So we have a variety of different people joining today. So almost, well, 40%, over 40% manufacturing, but we do have some from agriculture, service industry, and some others as well. We saw construction mentioned earlier. So again, thank you for joining us today, and hoping that this checklist will be useful for you and is modifiable to your needs as we go. So for us to get a sense of what hazardous products pose a risk to your workers in your workplace. So if you don't mind, pop it in the chat. What comes to mind to you when you're thinking about your workplace? What are some of those hazardous products you're concerned about? And you want to make sure people are well trained on their hazards and how to protect them in the workplace. Okay, so we've got fuel, silica dust, chlorine, different cleaning chemicals, right? Fuels, paints, benzene. Okay, isocyanates. So we've got some designated substances, right? Battery acid, plastics, paint thinner, benzene. There we go. Okay, so many things could be in various workplaces throughout Ontario. So thank you for letting us know what some of the things we're working with here. And diesel fuel, okay, right. So this is a screenshot of what the checklist actually looks like. So today, if you wanted to, you could click the link, the very top line here that says WHMIS and Chemical Exposure Checklist. If you click that link, it should take you right to our website, and you would be able to download the checklist for you. It also was pinned to the chat. Oh, there we go. It's there, popped right in there for you to download. And we encourage you absolutely, if you wanted to, take the time and open it on your screen today. And you can maybe even start filling it out as we go. And I'll just take a minute to switch to my copy and be able to show you what it looks like, because can everybody see that okay? Tova, are you able to see it? Oh, great. I see some thumbs up. So for those of you that have downloaded it, you'll be able to see that it's a fillable PDF. So you can actually, click on these sections and start putting in your workplace name and all the information here. You can put in the date, because you may want to do this several times over a few months as you continue to make improvements. So you can update the date in this one. And then you'll see there's 36 questions in total. So it's divided into starting out with the question. So what is the requirement? And you'll be able to answer in this box, yes, no, maybe I'm unsure right now. Maybe you've got to go and do some more searching, which I found did happen absolutely when I met with some of our clients right on site, or not applicable. So some of these just might not be applicable to you. So to put in your answer here, this might pose a little bit of problem, which did for me when I first used it, but it's simple once you know what to do. You can just click here, click the box, and you'll see that there's an arrows that pop up. So you can click the down or the down or to choose which one you want. But to make it actually stay, you have to, once you get to, you can also actually just type the Y and yes would pop up. But to make it stay there, you just have to click it. So click that box and it'll stay. Because if you don't click it, it will go. Sorry, Tova?
Yeah, I found if you're using this and it's NA, like if you hit N for no, if you hit the N a second time, it will go to NA.
Perfect.
That was something that I had to learn from another consultant.
Too. Okay. Thanks, Tova. Right. So that little piece, it will help with, so you don't experience those frustrations. Okay, so you can do that. There's the no, and if I N again, it goes to NA. And if I want it to stay, I click it, and then I can move. And here is where you can start to document your answers, or it's going to be your current state of how you're answering that question. So example for this one, are there hazardous chemicals in the workplace? Well, I'm guessing probably is a yes for everybody. But if you're not sure what is a hazardous chemical, we're really thinking about those chemicals that have WHMIS symbols, right? Those are hazardous. So could be an opportunity where you start to type in some examples, like silica was mentioned. Right, benzene. These are actually designated substances as well, which have extra another regulation, which we'll talk about. But you could have so many different things, So whatever comes to mind, type it in there.
And of
And then what?
course, there are lots of products that don't have WHMIS symbols that are still hazardous. So they might have consumer product labels. They might have
Yes.
TDG labels. If it's in a piping system or it's coming in a tank car, if you've got large quantities, it may be coming into your workplace if it's a pesticide product. Pesticide products are exempted from WHMIS, but they're labeled according to the Pest Control Products Act. So you may in fact have pesticide products, and those would of course still be hazardous as well. They could be fungicides, they could be insecticides, they could be herbicides, lots of different types of products in that respect. There are drugs. If you're working in more of a healthcare type setting, again, not WHMIS labeled because they're regulated under different types of labeling. However, they're still hazardous products as well. We know with things like anti-neoplastic drugs, just how dangerous those can be for those that are handling them. Are sanitizers WHMIS products? That's a great question, and it depends on the product. So if the product was originally packaged and sold with the intention to be sold directly to the consumer for use in a home setting, typically they would be labeled with a consumer products label. However, that same product, same ingredients, same composition may in fact have been sold from an industrial supplier intended for use in a workplace, and that same product would then have a WHMIS label on it instead. So all that to say, it really depends. However, I will tell you there are safety data sheets available for virtually all of the consumer products that you might think of, from cleaning products to automotive products, because remember, someone had to manufacture it in their workplace and someone had to pack it. So it has spent time in our workplace. The sheets are generally available, even if it has a consumer product label associated with it.
Great. Thanks, Tova. Yes, so and that's a common question we get. If you have consumer products in your workplace, do you still need to do WHMIS training? Do they still need labels, SDS sheets, that kind of thing? So I just wanted to point out we have developed an FAQ that you might find very useful. It's in the first link on the first bullet. So if you in your copy, because now I've switched back to this is just a screenshot. But if you click your link here, this is the toolkit that we developed for the WHMIS and chemical exposure campaigns with and the FAQ document inside this checklist is hopefully going to answer a bunch of your questions as well that we try to anticipate that you might have. So basically, if you have a chemical that's hazardous in your workplace, even if it truly is a consumer product, you've bought it, it's now in your workplace. I think technically you don't have to have an SDS, but you must have proper training so that workers, which again, I think is logical. You need to have good training for your workers to understand, here's the chemical you're using, here's the hazards, and here's how to work safely with it. So you absolutely need to do that, even for your consumer products, if those are hazardous there. Another bullet that I wanted to draw your attention to as a resource is this one is the Ministry of Labor's Guide to WHMIS. It is a fantastic resource as well. If you haven't looked at that, it probably will answer a bunch of your questions around WHMIS as well. And we've got two other resources, the WHMIS.org, which has been set up by the partners in the system, as well as there's this last one is from CCOHS, just as a quick reminder about the WHMIS pictograms, or CCOHS always has a lot of great resources as well. So that's sort of how this checklist is set up. We've got the question, how you think you answer it, the free text box for you to type in what you're currently observing in your workplace, And then the opportunity to type in what you think your next steps are. If you need to do anything further, you would type it in this box. And then for each question, we've also set up a link for where we got that question. Basically, it's going to tell you what regulation, but then also you'll see as we go through, it'll tell you what section in that regulation the question is coming from. My next slide here is just pointing to that guidance notes I mentioned earlier. So there'll be a note, these are at the bottom of your checklist, so after the last question. So we try to think of any supplemental information to help you answer that question, so, or giving some examples. So we don't have time today to go through all of that, but I wanted to make sure you all knew that was there for you to check out. It might help you as well. So we'll move through the questions now. So number 2 is, has the employer provided training for every worker who works with or who may be exposed in the course of their work to a hazardous product so this is what your training is supposed to be in. The labels, so contents required on supplier and workplace labels, and the purpose and significance of that information. The modes of identification used instead of the labels, if that applies, SDSs, the contents required and the purpose and the significance of those SDSs. And I'll just pause there for a second. Those 3 bullets there, I think are usually covered pretty well in generic training. And when I ask this question, I think most employers realize they're supposed to do WHMIS training, and they've done some type of generic training. So, you've popped in a video or there's an e-course, it's about an hour long, and you learn about WHMIS. What are the symbols? What are the kinds of labels? What's in an SDS? Those kind of things. And that's all very important information. But I want to make sure everybody realizes that that's not enough. That if you've done that generic training, perfect, that's like your first step. But don't forget about the last 3 bullets. This is where we get into the specific training that needs to be done in every workplace for every worker who handles those hazardous chemicals. And it's specific information that you, the employer, need to develop and then train your workers in it. So here's the question. Have you trained them? So then, therefore, do you have procedures for safe use, storage, handling, and disposal of those hazardous products? And also, if it is in the piping system, processing vessel, or conveyance system, do you have training and procedures on how to handle if there is fugitive emissions? So if there's an escape of hazardous chemicals from any of your processes. And it also mentions procedures to be followed in case of an emergency. So again, thinking about what could go wrong here in my workplace, thinking about that and having a good plan, procedures written, and people trained on them, and even having a drill. Right? So some of those procedures could be thinking about, what if I have a small spill? What if I have a large spill? What do we do? Do we have absorbent or anything nearby to help clean that up? Do people have access to it? Is it really available? Did we run out of it? Are we checking that? Have we practiced that? Especially, if you've got large volumes of hazardous chemicals, you really want to make sure you're prepared. Of course, we don't want to have an emergency, but as we know, sometimes things happen, so we have to be prepared. So that really, I spend a lot of time talking about this with our clients when on site. So just wanted to check in, curious, if you want to put in the chat, how many people have done both, either, let us know, have you done generic training already, which is great, or have you done also generic and specific training already in your workplace? I'd love to hear from you how you're doing with this right now. And not to worry if you haven't done it all, if you haven't gotten every chemical specific done, that's okay. You know, you're at the step where you've identified that you need to do it and you can move forward with that. So great. I see some of you have already done the generic training. Some of you have done both generic and specific, which is fabulous. Great to see that. Thank you for putting that in the chat. So just to follow through the checklist here, we've put in the links. So when you click the link, it'll go to Regulation 860. And here we've just identified it's section 6 and 7, where it says all of these things. We weren't savvy enough to be able to make that link go right to section 6 and 7. So you'll have to scroll in the regulation to find section 6 and 7. But that's where it mentions this exactly. It's where I got these bullets from. And also Regulation 851 in section 130 mentions this topic as well. So we put that here for you if you'd like to go and read what it has to say there. So to support you in your training, WSPS, we developed, super exciting, you may have heard, a new training session, a half day. We've called it Do-It-Yourself Workshop with WSPS, how to develop your workplace safety specific WHMIS training. Workplace specific WHMIS training. So Tova and I, we worked together along with another group, others in WSPS, and really tried to develop some good resources and be able to walk you through how to do this well. So getting you really familiar and comfortable with how do I do this, right? Like looking at those SDSs, how do you pull out the right information? What kind of things you need to put in a safe work procedure or work instruction, and how do you go about doing good training? So really high level thoughts there is just, you really want to make sure you're setting your workers up for success, right? So they know, they have the knowledge about how to handle those chemicals safely, right? To understand the hazards and how to work safely with them, right? What is the proper PPE? How do I put it on, right? How do I take it off, right? Do I need a respirator? Don't I? You're just putting it all in a good document, a procedure. You're telling them about it. You're watching them do the task, right? So you can show them how to do it, what it looks like being done properly, watch them do it, give them a chance to practice, and letting them, giving them feedback, giving some coaching until they can do it safely, right? And then as a supervisor, you've done everything, your due diligence to make sure your workers are set up for success. They know how to do it safely. You've actually watched them do it safely. So now I'm gonna sleep pretty good at night because I know I've done everything I can to protect that worker. We also have lots of generic WHMIS training options, so you can click the link there. We've got some articles. The FAQ document I mentioned earlier, this is the link here, right to that. Lots of links here in this bucket. You see we've got a few specific ones around farming and pesticides. So please click those links and ask any questions that you've got when you start developing that workplace-specific training. We're here to support you after today, for sure. It doesn't stop today. Okay, number 3 is another question that I found a lot of clients didn't realize that this was supposed to be happening. So the question is, has the employer, in consultation with the JHSC or HSR, Health and Safety Rep, reviewed the WHMIS training and the workers' familiarity with it at least annually? So that's written in the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So you can see here we've quoted OHSA, which is the Occupational and Safety Act. If you click on it and you scroll to section 42, subsection 3, this is where it says this. So what they're getting at really is, has the employer, in consultation with the committee, have you thought about your WHMIS program in its entirety and the training you have on it? So is it sufficient, right? And have you checked in, is it working, right? So you can think about this, and there are guidance notes to help you with this too. But the idea is, are we still doing a good job? So first of all, do we know all the hazardous products? Do we have good procedures? Are people following them? Or is there something wrong with our procedures that might need updating? Do we need to update that training? Right? And is it sufficient? So it's just taking the time to really look at that, and if we're doing a good job. And you'd want to document that in your Joint Health and Safety Committee meeting minutes, just to show that you're doing that, and that's kind of a continuous improvement. So with health and safety, as you know, it's kind of never over, because things are always changing, not only the products, the processes, the people, right? So just making sure that you continue to do a good job and make sure people have the most up-to-date information, and you're updating your procedures as required. There. So that's a new one that uh, might be new to you as well. Number 4. So are all hazardous products received from a supplier labeled with a supplier label? And if a label becomes illegible or removed, is it replaced with either a supplier label or a workplace label? So I think this one is pretty easy. You're just, you're making sure you've always have labels on things. And most things usually come with a label. So we've got a couple of resources there. But that's something to consider. And you want to make sure that you have the proper labels in place. Number 5. Are there up-to-date SDSs for hazardous products made available for all hazardous products in the workplace? So again, that's looking in Regulation 860, Section 17 is where they talk about the SDSs. We've got a few resources. We developed last year or the year before a document, how to read an SDS, because there's quite a bit of information in there. So we've got that link as well. CCOHS has a good link around SDSs. And the Government of Canada as well. So different things about, if you're wanting more information about SDSs. And kind of to follow up on that is number 6. Has the employer received any updated SDSs with significant changes? Right? And have the labels been updated, therefore? And has the training then been updated to reflect the changes in the SDSs? So this has become quite a topic the last year or two, as the hazardous products regulation have been updated and changes are being made to your SDSs. So I just wanted to point out in the resource section here, if you are struggling getting SDSs, or that are even have good information, because I know we've all seen them, some are great and some offer very little detail. It's actually Health Canada that enforces the hazardous products regulations and the requirement of suppliers to write good SDSs. So if you're struggling, always go back to the supplier first, ask them for the appropriate SDS, let them know if you're struggling to find certain information you're looking for. And if you get nowhere and they're just not providing you with a good SDS, you can always then reach out to Health Canada at this email, and they will follow through with it. So maybe just a quick question here. Has anyone noticed updated SDSs in your workplace already with these requirements? Curious, has anybody noticed any updated SDSs? If you wanted to click this poll, we'll see how it is. I think what I'm seeing out there with the clients I've seen, a lot of people have not even seen these yet. Some definitely have. But they should start rolling in, and maybe and to refresh what we mean by updated SDSs, I just put in a few slides around it to remind you. You may have seen this information earlier in other safety connections where we talked about this. But as a reminder, changes to the hazardous products regulation happened back in 2022. Actually, the HPR was amended, right? And there was a 3-year transition period for suppliers to update their SDSs in accordance with the updates and how classifications were changed. And all the suppliers were to have their updated SDSs done and given to you, the employer, by the end of last year. Okay. And if you're looking for more information about those requirements in the hazardous products regulations, you can definitely click this link. But just to give you a quick overview, same information we shared with the Ministry of Labor when this campaign first started, to let you know the key changes to the hazardous products regulations in how classifications are made. So there's a new physical hazard class that's been adopted, chemicals under pressure, hazard class name change for flammable aerosols to aerosols. A new category has been adopted for aerosols, category 3, non-flammable aerosol products. New subcategories for flammable gases, category 1A. Pyrophoric gases has been repealed, and these gases now are under a subcategory. Products classified under combustible dust now is a second hazardous statement. May form explosive dust-air mixture, which you definitely would want to know about. In section 3 of your SDSs, the composition or information on ingredients. So use of narrower concentration ranges that fall within one of the prescribed concentration ranges is now allowed. So again, this information is very important for the suppliers that are writing the SDSs. Right, all hazardous ingredients in a mixture at concentrations above relevant cutoff levels must be disclosed. Okay, and then lastly here, suppliers are required now to provide, obtain, or prepare a written document to include the changes to the SDSs and or the labels that are required as a significant result, as a result of the significant new data, and the date on which that data data became available. So I believe in the past, suppliers would just sort of send you the updated SDS, but now under the new HPR, they need to add in sort of a new document to indicate what the changes are and when they were introduced. So to kind of help you figure out what changed. And a really good tip to know if you have any updated SDSs, again, the ministry shared with me this tip, is that if you go to section 9 in your SDS, and if you see a section here for physical and chemical, under physical and chemical properties, this R, it might not be labeled R, but it would have something saying particle characteristics. Even if it says no data available or not applicable, or it might give you information on it, that is one of the new requirements, and that's a quick, easy way to know that your SDS has been updated. You also may have heard recently about the alignment of the hazardous products between Canada and the US, and that the US has extended their compliance deadline from July of 2027 to November 19th of 2027. So what does that mean for us? So Canada's HBR compliance status and approach. So I just clarified with the ministry about this. And basically Canada's, as we just talked about, our Canada 3-year transition to amend the hazardous product regulation ended at the end of last year. So all hazardous products must fully comply with the amended HPR. The U.S. extension is recognized as significant for cross-border supply chains from Health Canada. So Health Canada will focus on compliance promotion until the end of the U.S. transition period, which is again November 19th, 2027. But Health Canada can still take enforcement action at any time if warranted. So my understanding is Health Canada, sort of in recognizing that cross-border is quite significant, and that so they're choosing to follow more of a compliance promotion, maybe a softer approach, making sure suppliers are doing this, but they, of course, nothing has changed and they can enforce it if felt warranted. One thing I want to make super clear that I got from the ministry is they want to make sure that you realize in Ontario, our WHMIS regulation 860 compliance has not changed. Right, so just as a reminder, Health Canada and WHMIS, they are the ones that are writing the hazardous products regulations and are enforcing the suppliers making good SDSs, basically. In Ontario, we have our WHMIS Regulation 860, and it's the Ministry of Labour that enforces WHMIS training, right? And are you doing good WHMIS training in your workplace? So provincially regulated employers should not assume WHMIS enforcement is paused, right? Regular enforcement of WHMIS training is going to continue, right? So the ministry's inspectors may still be looking for proof of WHMIS training if they come to your workplace, right? And once that they see that you're receiving those updated SDSs in your workplace, they are expecting you to provide updated SDSs. And really the purpose is to ensure workers have the knowledge to work safely with those hazardous products to prevent injury and illness, right? Which makes sense. We all want that, right? So I just took a few FAQs from our document to highlight here again, in case you're wondering. What are the triggers that would require WHMIS retraining? So from the point of the ministry, if an SDS has been updated by the supplier to make it compliant with the amended HPR, that would require updated training. If there's no proof of WHMIS specific training or generic training, right? If they're in there and they're saying, have you done your WHMIS training? They definitely could be asking, show me, when did you do it? Has anything changed since you did the training? Who attended? Did everybody get it? Who needs it? So those are some details they might be asking, which again, you want to make sure everybody's getting the information they need before they start working with the hazardous chemicals. Or simply lack of worker knowledge on the hazards associated with the products they work with. So the ministry could just ask the workers, tell me a bit about this chemical that you're handling. A couple of questions they might ask is, do you understand the hazards, of this chemical? How could it hurt you? Potential health hazards. And how do you protect yourself when working with this chemical? Right, so that's kind of those key basic information. How could this hurt me? And how do I protect myself from it? And another FAQ, what is the obligation of suppliers outside of Canada to ensure products being used in Canada meet our legislative requirements? So all suppliers of hazardous products being supplied anywhere in Canada must comply with Canada's HPA and HPR. So their SDS, if their SDSs are not compliant, you can contact Health Canada to enforce these regulations. They will refer the concern to the appropriate jurisdiction. And in Ontario, That's the Ministry of Labor. So the MLITSD occupational hygienist, the consultants, inspectors, they have been given authority to enforce the HPR on behalf of Health Canada. Okay, so again, you wouldn't want to directly go right to reporting it to Health Canada or the Ministry of Labor. Your first line of defense would be go to the supplier. Give them a chance. Say, hey, do you realize I don't have an updated SDS? Do I have the most updated one? Do you know that it has to be updated? Some suppliers may have somehow missed this information and they need to make sure that they are in compliance. Okay, so it is, unfortunately, I think a work in progress out there. A lot of SDSs still need to be made compliant and sent to you. Okay, so if you still have any questions around all of this, here's a good email as well at Health Canada if you have further questions. Okay, so moving along with our questions, number 7. Are their chemicals decanted into another container? And if so, are they labeled with a workplace label? So, you know, this is covered quite in your generic WHMIS training. Most people know this. It's in section 10 of Regulation 860. Okay, so it's really important to have a label in every chemical. So as you're walking through your workplace, sort of have an eye, look for those variety of chemicals, maybe spray bottles, things that have been put into smaller containers, or maybe even big containers, big drums. Everything should have a label, okay? Number 8, if there's training on the use of the color coding, labels, is there training on the use of color coding labels or other modes of identification when hazardous products are contained or transferred in piping and piping systems, process reaction vessels, tank cars, conveyor belts systems? Again, everything should be labeled if there's hazardous products in it, or workers should be able to know that that pipe has a hazardous chemical, and your labeling system, people know how to read it so they know what's in there. Number 9, do you have a laboratory? And if so, are laboratory samples properly labeled? So I've added the where in the regulation 860 section 14 talks specifics about laboratory samples if it applies to your workplace. And a really good resource for this is also the Ministry of Labor's guide here. And there's a section specifically on laboratories and laboratory samples. So I highly recommend you check that one out as well. Number 10, are food, drink, and tobacco prohibited in any room, area, or place where any substance that is poisonous by ingestion is exposed? Okay, and it's actually in Regulation 851 where they talk about this topic. And again, super important, you don't want to have people having drinks or food in places where chemicals that are poisonous by ingestion could get into get into your food. So, you know, by mist, it could be traveling in the air, landing on your food, or it could be you, if you haven't washed up properly, right? It could get transferred when you touch your food, or drinking it, if it's on your lips, it could get transferred into your body. So how do you know if those chemicals are poisonous by ingestion? You can definitely check out your SDS, right? If you have any questions about your chemicals, you go to your SDS and it should answer your questions right in there. Okay, so there is a section there that will tell you if it's poisonous by ingestion or not. Okay, so it's in your SDS. Number 11. Is PPE appropriate to the chemicals being used? And has the employer provided workers instruction on its care and use before wearing or using the protective clothing? right? So I know all of you have heard about this and the appropriate, making sure this is done properly, as Tova mentioned at the beginning of the session, right? So you can look to Regulation 851, Section 9 through 86, where it talks a lot about that. But generally, again, how do you know what kind of PPE you need? Going to your SDS in that section, and it should clarify for you, right? Because some chemicals are so harsh, they could eat right through your nitrile glove. So you might need, the heavier duty type chemicals. And if you're not sure, are you getting the right one? You can always connect with your suppliers too. Connect with your supplier, telling them the chemicals you've got, and they can help you through it. And just a note too, make sure that the PPE actually fits your workers, right? We're all of different sizes. And getting something that fits properly for you so workers aren't fumbling around. If it's too big and falling off them, the PPE themselves sometimes could become a hazard or make it difficult for the worker. So checking in with the workers, is it fitting well? Can they work well with it when they've got all their PPE on? Because it can get, especially if they've got the respirator and safety glasses and gloves, and it's all got to fit together. We do have courses on generics around PPE equipment. There's a guide to PPE as well, but you want to do this well. And just a quick note too, as you're touching things, and if you've got gloves on, there's high risk of exposure to that chemical. Especially, you want to be careful if your chemicals have a skin notation when you look at that hazardous chemical, because they are, it is highly absorbed through the skin and can have health effects that way if it has a skin notation. So actually giving some training to workers, and it may seem maybe a bit over the top, but it's not. Just some basic training on how to take the gloves off properly and the importance of doing it right so you don't get the chemical on your skin when you're taking it off, right? So having some training around that is really important part of it. Number 12, are workers provided with appropriate respirators for their task? That's in Regulation 833. And has a chemical exposure assessment been completed to ensure the respirator provides sufficient protection? And this is where, when I'm doing my hygiene work, we get into some details, because not one respirator doesn't fit every situation. So it just takes a bit of knowledge in terms of, have we done an air assessment so we understand the concentration level of that chemical in the workplace, right? So if you're using a methyl ethyl ketone, for example, as a solvent, are our levels nice and low? Do I even need a respirator? Right? That the airborne concentrations are so low, my results showed back non-detect. It's super low. Or in my situation, the results come back and they're actually over the exposure limit. And then I need to know, and it would be part of your report of the air assessment, what kind of respirator do you need? Because a half-face respirator will give you a different level of protection compared to a full-face tight-fitting respirator. And you figure that out by looking at the protection, the assigned protection factor of that respirator, and you compare it to the levels in your air, right? And you get that maximum use concentration by multiplying the exposure limit by the actual rate that you have, what is in your workplace. And you want to make sure that maximum use concentration is lower than the kind of respirator that you've got. So it's can be a little tricky, but once you understand that calculation, that's the idea. You want to make sure you're providing the right level. No, so two things really. The right type of respirator, half face, full face, or potentially a powered air purifying respirator, which can offer even more protection. So the right type of respirator, and then also we'll get into it if you're needing to use a cartridge to filter out certain chemicals. That's super important to make sure you're changing that cartridge before the chemicals actually seep through that cartridge and then into the breathing zone. So those are some details that are super important that you've got figured out for your workplace so people are not being exposed. Okay. And of course, WSPS, we have hygienists like me throughout the province that can do these air assessments for you and help you figure all of that out, of course. Number 13 says, is there a written respiratory protection program at your facility that's compliant with Regulation 833? So that is where section 9 through 13 is very detailed what you have to have in your respiratory protection program. And we can help you develop these if you're still, if it's a work in progress. We have a building block template that we can offer you, or we can, develop it together. Just to make sure you're doing this right, because the details, devil in the details, I think is the saying, right? Super important that you understand when to change your filter. If it's just a filter that's stopping particles, your filter is going to just like an N95, P100. As it gets filled up, it will get clogged. So you'll actually just kind of it'll get harder to breathe through. So that would be an indicator you need a new one. But if it's a cartridge that is stopping volatile organic compounds or something like that, it will not get full. It will get full, but what happens is it will then start to seep through and people will start to breathe it in. So you need to understand how much the worker's being exposed to and change that cartridge before it breaks through. Okay. We also have a safety connection, a pre-recorded safety connection, all about respiratory protection and also on air assessments and what that's all about, if you wanted to look at those. Number 14, have the workers wearing the respirators been fit tested and trained in the correct use, care, and maintenance? Right. And to follow along with that, are workers actually performing those seal checks every time they put on a respirator? So the idea here is that if it's a tight fitting respirator, it is super important you get the right size. So being fit tested is really just making sure, it's not a test like you're going to fail a quiz or anything. It's actually just making sure that respirator you've chosen will get a good seal. And when I first was introduced to this, the kind of the general N95 that looks like kind of like a circle, it actually did not fit me. The way my face is shaped, there was holes, it was coming in through my nose, I could feel it coming in through my chin. Often those are leakage parts. So I had to just find, and it's pretty simple. You just try a different version, right? So my version fits differently. So it will form, it's a little more flexible, it forms better, and I can get a snug fit. So you want to do that for your workers, right? Just do the fit testing and make sure you've got a good fit for everybody. So that's what that fit testing is doing. So when you go to do that fit testing, you might want to have a few different samples that they can try in case they fail. So they can try a second option or a third option. We all have unique shapes of faces. Okay. And a huge problem that we see still today is facial hair. using
Yeah, I
being
just dropped
used.
that in the
Yeah.
chat.
Do you want to jump in, Tova? Sure.
Yeah, I went to a workplace recently and saw they were working with lead solder. I see a gentleman wearing a half-face respirator fitted with P100 cartridges, and he has a full Santa beard. And I'm thinking to myself, like, you don't get a seal. There is no seal. That respirator at that point is not providing any protection at all for that worker for that task.
Right.
And like Tony said, size makes a big difference. What fits Tony may not fit me. I know that I wear a size smaller, extra small respirator, and this is not one size fits most. This is often very specified sizing. And so be mindful of that.
Right. Thanks, Tova. Yes, one option too, just to mention quickly, if you're struggling with for whatever reason, people, really need to wear a beard, or for whatever reason can't use that tight fitting, their other option is the PAPR, powered air purifying respirator, and the kind, or PAPR for short, you may hear. If you get the loose fitted hood kind, that can work for people with facial hair. It's really kind of nice. It's a bit just a whole different design, and it will push the air. So it has a battery pack on it, and it actually supplies the air, and it pushes the air. The loose fitting hood type pushes the air through, and it actually can have a nice cooling effect as well. So there's different options if you're struggling with that in your workplace. Okay, moving on to number 15. Are the respirators provided approved by a governing body? This is important to make sure you're actually getting a good respirator that's approved by NIOSH or another factor. There's so much across the world now you can order, and some things are not approved. So you want it to make sure it's NIOSH approved. I'm just looking at the time. I should move a little quicker here. Number 16, has a cartridge and filter replacement schedule been determined for when the changing of the filters or cartridge been done to prevent exposure? That's what I was speaking about previously. Very important detail to figure out when you're writing your respiratory protection program, and to communicate that with your worker. You have to figure that out for them. You can't expect the worker to know when to change their cartridge. Okay, figure it out together and make sure they understand. Is the respirator expected to be used in an IDLH, which immediately dangerous to life and health atmosphere? Right, I've put in a link to NIOSH that we look at those, we consider for those values. So if you've never heard of this before, you can check your SDSs, your hazardous products. Ingredients are listed in section 3, and you can look at those chemicals. You'll see the exposure limit for them, and you can also check the this link here, NIOSH links for IDLH. Okay, if yes, is it fitted with an auxiliary supply of air that is sufficient to allow them to escape from the environment if the airline malfunctions? So that's a detail to be aware of if you're using if you're in that kind of atmosphere, IDLH atmosphere. Is the respirator supplied with breathing air from either an air cylinder or a compressor? And if yes, does it meet the requirements laid out in section 10, subsection 5 of the regulation? And then further, it speaks to, is the respirator may be fed from an oil lubricated compressor? And if yes, does it meet the requirements listed in section 5, subsection 5 of regulation? So here it's just getting around, there's some details. If you are having a supplied breathing from a cylinder, especially air, oil, you're wanting to make sure you're ensuring that that supplied air is safe for your workers. So the details are in the legislation there. Okay, and connect with us if you have further questions about that. Number 20, are respirators maintained as per the manufacturer's instruction? Super important when using your respirators, and that would be part of your training when you are providing workers with your respirators. So not only how to put it on properly, um, making sure you get a good seal every time you put it on, but then how do you store it? Is it maintained? So having that detail in your training is super important, right? And around those cartridges, right? They need to be put back when you're not using it in a sealed, you could put it back in the bag, seal the bag and in a tote away from the work environment. Otherwise, you're kind of it keeps being used up and then you'll go through them quicker. But again, if you have questions around your cartridges, your actual respirators, the best people to get that information from is your supplier because they know their materials the best, right? So you need to take time to figure it out for your workplace. Number 21, is the chemical storage appropriate for your chemicals being stored? So here we're going back into Regulation 851. Section 45 and 22 mentions flammable liquids, and also Regulation 833 also mentions it. So we've tried to put in the links here for you. But again, you really need to know the chemicals in your workplace, right? So going back to your SDSs, and Section 7 will connect you with the proper handling and storage for the chemicals that you're handling. Okay, CCOHS has a great resource as well, saying storage of the safety cabinets for hazardous chemicals. I know there's always lots of questions around that, and storing those safely. So that's a really good resource. Is there proper spill containment procedures and equipment? That is mentioned in Regulation 860. Okay, so again, if you have a spill, do you have good procedures and does everybody know what to do? And again, CCOHS has a great document there to help you as well sort that out and things to consider when you're writing your procedures. Are chemical spills and leaks cleaned up immediately? Well, this is something that you will observe as well as you're doing your walkthrough. You know, just looking at your workplace, do you see spills? Do you see, what does it look like? Is it a nice, neat environment, or do we have things that, clearly have been on the floor leaking from containers? They've been there who knows how long, right? So you could see different things. So you want to do this well, because if you have things that have spilled and it's still sitting there, right, people are still being exposed to it. They could slip and trip on it, but they could also, be breathing any of the chemicals it's being given off. Number 23, are flammable chemicals stored appropriately? Super important. Regulation 851 mentions that, Section 22 to 23. We've tried to connect you with also the Ontario Fire Code will speak to this. Again, CCOHS's safety cabinets, around safety cabinets. But you want to do this well. And it depends on how much liquid you have in your workplace. So taking time to sort that out for you. Also, number 24, are flammable liquids dispensed safely with adequate bonding and grounding? So important. This one it really makes me nervous. If you are decanting or pouring flammable liquids from one container to another, you want to make sure you have proper bonding and grounding. Straps they're being used. You have a good procedure in place, and people have been trained on how to do that right. Because you could absolutely get a static charge if you do not do this properly, right? That could ignite that flammable liquid and cause the flammable vapors in the air, which could cause an explosion, right? So that is super important. CCOHS also has a great resource on this to talk to that topic. Are incompatible chemicals stored separately? 851 connects that as well with resources. Go to your SDS. You'll be able to find what's incompatible. It'll tell you, right? And you want to make sure you are keeping those separate. Right. Compressed gas storage, are they, numbers we're on 26, are they stored upright and protected from damage and secured from falling? That is in Regulation 851. So that's another thing you can just always have an eye when you're out looking in your workplace. Are those compressed gas cylinders chained or somehow prevented from falling over or getting struck by something, right? Those are hazardous. If they get punctured, right, they could take off like a rocket. And, you've heard of stories where they've even punctured, through a cement wall, the roof. Crazy things can happen. So that's super important. Lots of resources you can see listed here to help you with your compressed gas storage. 27, where a worker is likely to be exposed to a hazardous chemical agent that could cause injury to the eye or skin, has the employer provided as many of the following as are needed for adequate emergency treatment? Emergency eye washes, your showers, maybe your chemicals actually require antidotes, those kind of things. So again, something you're checking on your walkabout, right? And have we done a good job of providing these for our workers? Do workers know where they are? Are these working? Can people get to them without tripping over things? Or do we have things stored in front of it? Are they filthy? Have we run the actual water? Or is it, been sitting there stagnant? And if somebody actually went to use it, who knows what would come out of there? Is it a good tepid temperature, right? So people aren't actually burnt or, scalded or frozen if they go to use it. So a lot of great resources listed here to help you figure out how to do this well and make sure they're working properly. People can get to them. So that's number 28, talks about, are they in good working condition? Number 29, are adequate spill kits available in close proximity to the areas of that potential spill? And are they adequately stocked and inspected regularly? So that's a great item to put on your monthly inspections for your committee, or even you as a safety professional, you're looking to make sure that's available. Number 30, if the employer produces a hazardous product at their workplace, did they prepare a safety data sheet for that product that complies with the requirements in the hazardous products regulation that we were talking about earlier, right? So if you are actually making these in your workplace, you have a lot of responsibilities, and you want to make sure you are one of those good suppliers, writing a good SDS and providing it to the people you're supplying it to. Number 31, has the employer reviewed the hazardous materials SDS to determine if any of the hazardous ingredients listed in the SDS have an occupational exposure limit and the notation skin or simple asphyxiant in it? So that's mentioned in Regulation 833, Section 7. Right. So in general, again, super important to understand what hazardous chemicals are in your workplace. Have you taken the time to actually look at your SDS, look at what those ingredients, hazardous ingredients are in Section 3, and you can look up their exposure limits. So that's what this first bullet is the ministry in Ontario, the exposure limits for the 700 chemicals. You can put them in this website that the ministry has. You can copy and paste by CAS number. I suggest that's the best way to go because some chemicals have different names. But if you're concerned about that, you haven't done any air assessments, we as occupational hygienists, we can help you figure that out. Okay. And definitely if you have things that have a skin notation, you want to make sure people are not touching getting that. So lastly, has that chemical exposure assessment been conducted to ensure compliance with Regulation 833? And if yes, is it still relevant? Has things changed in the workplace? So again, making sure you've done that well. Number 33, was the chemical exposure assessment performed by knowledgeable individuals using a standard method with instructions and instrumentation that is properly calibrated and maintained as that's required. So the links here I've put into our occupational hygiene consulting teams and our air exposure assessments. We've done safety connections on what they're all about, but also the last two bullets are about the credentials. So the first one is the CIH, Certified Industrial Hygienist, or the ROH, the Canadian ROH. Those would be credentials for people that are doing this type of air assessments. 34, is there a process that uses or produces a hazardous biological or chemical agent and uses a ventilation system to limit the exposure of a worker? So this is back to Regulation 851 and the need for pre-start reviews. So I would definitely, if you have ventilation in your workplace and it's designed to limit the worker's exposure to that chemical, you should really be having a pre-start review done to make sure that ventilation system is adequate and it's done properly. Also mentioned in this section of the Regulation 851 is around flammable liquids. If you have more than 235 liters. So if you have a lot of flammable liquids in your storing it inside, you need a pre-start review as well. So check the details out there. And that's number 35. If yes, has the pre-start health and safety been completed? Right, so those questions. And my last question, right under the hour, is there possible exposures to any of the 11 designated substances in your workplace? And we've just written the 11 substances here for you because I'm surprised actually. Several clients that I've been to, when we talked about this, they actually didn't realize that they had some of these. Isocyanates can be found in foams that are sometimes used for packaging, that, or insulation between garage doors, so there's instances where these might be in your chemicals that you didn't realize. Benzene might be in your cleaner, in the parts department. So check out what chemicals you're using and look for these designated substances, because if you have them, you need to do a designated substance assessment in consultation with your committee. And if there is potential worker exposure and their health can be affected, you must develop a control program. And all of that is in Regulation 490. And we can absolutely help you figure that out if you need help with that too. So I'm just seeing we're almost at the end of our time, and I'm just checking the chat.
Yeah, so I've been answering some questions in the chat as we go. Grabbing some stuff out of the legislation, as we so often do. You're so welcome, Myron. I'm glad that you found that helpful. We did have a question from Liz, and it was actually a great one about outdoor situations. So when working with chemicals outside, the obviously conditions can change drastically and they can affect exposure limits, but also the level of exposure that workers have. What would you recommend for testing in these types of variable conditions? Now, my experience with working with air assessments has always been in indoor environments that tend to be much more consistent. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a great question, and it is quite unique. Majority, like Tova said, is inside, but I guess I would go back to thinking just logically, what is the process? Like if it's always being done outside, what are we doing to do our best to minimize the exposure? Or if it's kind of one-offs, what can we do to shield if there, if there's a big gust of wind, or, what are we doing to minimize those elements and minimize exposure? And you can you can talk with the hygienist and give them the details about your situation, and we will plan our assessment to be taken and done in a typical setting, or we can also try to time it when you would be doing these other one-off situations where it may be different, where we can try to capture an exposure level when those things are happening as well. So we can try to do a variety of scenarios, whichever makes sense for your workplace.
Yeah, Rachel just pointed out in the chat, she said, I would think that personal monitoring, try to sort of capture it on a worst case scenario basis as much as possible. Yeah, I mean,
well, I'd actually just say, just to be
with
careful. Yeah, sorry, just to be careful with
Yeah.
that too. If you have, you may overinflate your results too. So absolutely, I understand. I thought the same thing for sure. If you have someone coming in, always do worst case scenario, really like put in, worst case, you definitely will get some results. And those results may come back high, which you want to know about. But you will also want to know typical, because if it's not typical, that happens maybe once a year. But most of my day, this is my scenario. You want to understand that level, because if that level truly is so low, I don't need to have respirators. You want proof of that. Right? And you want to be, because you don't want to be making people wear all this respiratory protection if they don't need to. So both are important, I would say.
Yeah, before we have more folks that hop off, I just want to quickly thank you for joining us for a session. We are still here for questions as we finish off. Feel free to keep dropping those in the chat. I do want to quickly mention that this is also a working document that you've just downloaded. Go and fill it out for yourself. If you've got multiple sites, fill it out for multiple sites. Go and go and try it out. And then we have a session that is on March 31st. It's actually just it's like a pure Q&A. Go try the checklist and then come back to us and ask your questions. Bring your challenges to us. This is an opportunity. This is the part 1 of a 2-part series where I would encourage you to go and get your hands dirty and then come back to us looking, if you're looking for support, we have this built-in hour and a half that you'll be able to join us and get more of your questions answered. I'm not saying that we aren't answering questions until there are no more questions. We are answering questions until there are no more questions. But it's going to be that opportunity for you to be able to come in and really pick Tony's brain, my brain. Even after you've done the assessment, you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what's next. Or like, I spotted this, I need more information. Bring us your problems. We are here to help. Yeah, you'll be sent an invite to the part 2 on how to register. My hope is that between now and your part 2, you'll have an opportunity to be able to actually get your hands dirty with the tool.
Exactly. Thanks, everyone. Good luck.
Yep, you'll be automatically enrolled today because excellent. So you're getting automatic enrollment. If you do have further questions about a specific chemical related situation in your workplace, do drop them into the chat. Tony and I are still here. We're going to be here until you're satisfied at the end of today with the answers that you get. You're so welcome. Will the slides be shared? We don't share our slides, unfortunately, but we do have that downloadable tool. So please go ahead and download the tool. I believe a link will also be sent to you at the end of the session that will allow you to be able to download that as well. Is there any provincial legislation that requires janitorial companies to provide a hazardous product inventory list Would a table of contents with the applicable SDS itself meet the compliance requirement? So here's my take on that, and Tony, you can have your take. So those that work with the products, they have a legal right under the, the worker's right to know the hazards of the product that they work with. This is also true for those that are working in proximity to products. So if you are a janitorial company, let's say in an office, there is potential for the office workers in that space to be exposed to the products that you are using. Perhaps someone is, leaves a bottle on a desk by accident in the, while you're cleaning in those evening hours. Now we have a worker who has potential exposure. They have that product sitting on their desk. In terms of providing simply a table of contents, that would not be enough. You really do need to provide the safety data sheets. Those workers have a right to have access to those sheets. There may be an emergency that happens with something in that space while they are working in the office where your staff may not be there. So they need the information to be able to protect their own safety, to be able to then use the information, understand what the risks of that product are. Tony, what are your thoughts on that question?
I've just said, excellent, Tova. I agree completely. Yes. Good, right. Something to mention about SDSs being available. I don't think I mentioned this time, but it could be electronic or it could be paper-based. So that as long as the workers know that how to get it and they're actually allowed access anytime they need to be able to get it, that's allowed as well, right? But hopefully your workplace specific training, those procedures and your training on the chemicals they're actually handling, that training will also include that SDS, right? So hopefully the workers, if you've done a good job with that specific training, they're going to know those hazards. They're going to feel comfortable in how to protect themselves. And then also in that training, they will have a chance to look at the SDS, but know how to, again, look at that SDS later and get to it if they need it later. So that would be part of the training too. But that's a great question for sure.
Sounds great. All right, you're so welcome. Any more further questions? I just had a further thought, by the way, Myron, about the sort of, when you're working with employers that you're being contracted with, if you are in the janitorial services sector, I would work with your clients to be sure that the janitorial closets and rooms that your staff are working in are properly equipped. Obviously, as a contractor, it's challenging for you to be able to, like you're not really. Oh, and I further question about cross-docking. Yep, Sherry, we've got you. Let me just finish my thought, and then we'll talk a little bit about cross-docking. So some of the high-level thoughts would be, you can go and do some scoping as you're doing your scoping of the contract to see what is actually available in those closets. Go and take a look at the safety data sheets, check to see what the safety data sheets tell you about what needs to be in place. If, for instance, it says that you need to provide for this particular product a 15-minute wash time if something gets in someone's eye, well, you can't provide that with a bottle. You're going to need a plumbed eye wash station. So what is the employer going to do to ensure that they're providing in that janitorial room to which they are the one who has care and control over the room or space, especially if they're the owner of the building? What are they going to do to ensure that you have the resources that you need to be able to ensure that your staff are able to provide, for instance, those various first aid treatments? And a 15-minute wash time is a good example of a first aid treatment that you simply can't deliver with a bottle. There's, maybe 30 seconds worth of liquid in a bottle. So it becomes a conversation with you and with the company that you're working with to ensure that your staff are safe. Can you use a bottle to get to a station? Yes-ish. But the station can't be behind a door. That's also one of the big challenges. If their expectation is that you're going to be able to drag them to, halfway across the facility and then get through a door, many cleaners, and I'm talking about cleaners here specifically, they work alone. So, okay, now I'm like pumping, if I can get to the bottle, now I'm pumping this stuff into my eyes. I can't see. Now I'm having to walk halfway across the facility to go to get to a plumbed eye wash station. I really am extremely, Troy, I'm extremely cautious about saying, yes, you can use a bottle to get to a plumbed eye wash station. The plumbed eye wash station really does need to be, and if you look at what the ANSI standard says about plumbed eye wash stations, the eye wash station is it is supposed to be kind of in this barrier-free type environment between your work area to the station. It has to be paddle activated. I give a solid thumbs down to like the little stations that are just attached to a faucet or a sink. Those are typically not maintained in a sanitary fashion. They typically don't have a tepid temperature control regulation valve on them. They're not paddle activated. For the most part, workers are not successfully able to use them if they do end up having to wash something out of their eye. And if they do use them, there's the sanitary issue and then there's the temperature issue. All of this is just a complete nightmare. With the bottles, one of the biggest challenges is running out. The fact that you are going to need another worker to be able to intervene, to be able to get this person to the station. And there is very real potential that if you're having to go into, past a door, maybe you don't have a key. Like, it's that simple. You could be standing there with somebody, burning their eyes, and you're like fishing for the key to try to get to that station. That would not be considered compliant. Can I provide a link to ANSI standard? Yeah, I can do that. Yvonne, feel free to drop me a line.
Yes, and just to note, the CCOHS, their eye wash emergency document, that was one of the links. It's a really good read through as well.
Yeah,
all of the eye washes.
Yeah, it's a great read through. I always sort of filter this through my experiences working in a lab, and if I think to myself, like, and my experiences working in industry, where like I went to one workplace, they said they'd done workplace inspections, like every month for 5 years, and then I go and I was like, your eye wash station has like a lathe in front of it. Like, what are you doing? And I literally just said, okay, I now have something in my eyes and I'm doing this. Like, what's going to happen next? And they didn't have any good answers for me. Like, I would really just grab yourself a blindfold and think to yourself, okay, what's going to happen next? Like, instantaneously, are we able to deliver this? And there's a pretty high likelihood that the answer is going to be no, if you're just trying to kind of use a bottle to get to that next space, especially if someone is alone. Yeah. You're welcome. So there was a question about cross-docking. So let's chat a little bit about cross-docking. So with cross-docking and storage, I saw up in the chat someone said, 235 liters. And when we think about 235 liters is the limit in the PSR guideline that decides whether or not, for flammable liquids, whether or not you need a pre-store health and safety review. If you have less than 235 liters, and there's an exemption to that. But that doesn't necessarily apply to other types of products. That's very prescriptive for flammable liquids in table item 1. What I would suggest for the cross-docking is you need to look at the hazards of the products that you are in fact cross-docking. So if you're working with flammable liquids and you are getting, up over that 235 liters that are in your building or site at any given time, I would encourage you to have a pre-start health and safety review on that. You may need specific protocols for handling like big totes. If you're dealing with flammables with big totes, you're dealing with a lot of fuel there. And if there is some sort of a fire, like there's very real risk that this could go real bad on you. So some of the high level thoughts would be, at that point, I would really say, like, you need to have a PSR on that. You may need specialized fire suppression systems. You may need some sort of a room where you are, when we think about cross-docking, it's not always as simple as like stuff goes in, stuff goes out. If you're storing it for any period of time and it has very specific hazards associated with it, you may in fact need to have a chemical room for that, where you are storing it in an area with like gravity open, louvers, or where you have specific ventilation, where you have secondary containment through the use of things like berms, to be able to maintain if there was a spill. Those are all things we want to think about with the cross docking. Yeah, what is considered maximum storage time? Tony, I'm going to let you take that one because I'm not confident in the answer I'm going to give. I have some thoughts on it, though. I mean, storage is storage, and if you're not using it, you're storing it. If you're not cracking it open, it's storage. But I don't know that there's actually a time frame on that.
Right. Thanks, Tova. Yeah, that one,
okay.
Nothing specific registers in my brain for that questions. And maximum storage time, I guess thinking about looking at your chemical and your supplier, if they have specifics on when does your chemical potentially expire. So knowing those details, getting the information from the supplier. Nothing else is coming to my mind either. I'm just seeing another question there. How can we get an in-house assessment if we would like one? So not sure which kind of assessment you mean. You can definitely have a WSPS consultant come in and walk through this checklist with you and walk around to look at your chemicals and your practices. Or so you reach out to your local account manager, WSPS account manager, or if you don't have one yet, just reach out to WSPS.ca or connect with us. We will connect you. We will figure out how to get you your account manager. And they're there to help you with all of your health and safety needs, not just chemicals. So they're a great person to know if you don't have one yet. And then, or if you're talking about an air assessment, like one of our hygienists to come in and do a chemical exposure assessment for your workplace, your account manager would still be the same person you connect with, and you let them know that's what you're looking for. And then you connect with your hygienist, your occupational hygienist from WSPS, and we can figure out all the details with you, talk about the chemicals you're handling, and we'll figure out how to assess those with you and talk about those details. Is it a typical day? Is it a worst case scenario day? And come up with a good strategy for the air assessment.
Yeah, a couple of the thoughts. So there was a question about one facility has 12 custodial clauses. We manage our chemicals and fit 2 for required standard might be our solution. Yeah, so it may be that what you do is there are janitorial closets where you're doing, where you're doing dispensing, where you're doing decanting. You may, and the others you don't. Where you're simply having, that's where like the cart lives, and you fill the containers in the storage rooms that you do in fact have proper emergency eye wash, showers if appropriate. You've got those protocols in place. So that might be a solution for you. It's good questions. It really points to the concept of a risk assessment, ultimately, of assessing the tasks and activities. When we look at chemicals, we often think of just like, okay, here's the chemical, and this is, these are the risks of the product. But we also want to ask some hard questions of ourselves, are really about what we're doing with that product. There are elements that do increase risk, and decanting, diluting is another that does increase that risk because it elevates the level of handling. You may be handling a concentrate. It relies on folks getting the dilution right. There's potential for like heat of solution. If the protocols are not followed properly, of splashing, there are a lot of different things that can be going on. So I'd encourage you to, think hard about kind of what you're doing with them. Other things that increase risk, spraying is another. Anytime that you're creating aerosols, there's increased risk of the chemical getting into the body. It's just so easy for things to get that have been turned into a cloud to now get into the lungs, onto the skin, into the eyes, as well as into hair, contaminating personal clothing or uniforms, as well as onto surfaces as well in the area. Back to the question about storage and cross-docking. I think there was one more question about that. I'm just looking to see what that was. Things sometimes come in and out in a given day. I would be working with, I guess the question is, where are these things coming from and where are they going? It's okay if something is in your workplace for only a day, but you still need to understand the risks and hazards of the product. And you still do need to be prepared to, in an emergency. What if the pallet arrives and it's damaged? Do you know what's on that pallet? Do you have a safety data sheet for it? Even if it is in your workplace only for a day, even if it is not being used and it's only being stored, there is still potential for emergencies to occur with that product. So I would encourage you to ensure that before the product is arriving at your site, that you know what you're expecting in terms of the product that's being delivered. It does now, while it's in transit, you're probably receiving a bill of lading, TDG. But once it's on your site, it becomes a WHMIS controlled product, even if it's only there for a day. So be sure that you are getting that safety data sheet, having that handy in the event that something does go wrong. Any other further thoughts on that, Tony?
No, I think that's excellent. Yes, when you're thinking about potential, if there's potential, you want to be prepared.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Also, you may decide that there are products that you simply are not going to cross-dock. I would never want to be someone cross-docking, unless I was very prepared, unless this was a warehouse that handled chemicals, on a regular basis. I would not probably want to be cross-docking, pool chemicals. I probably, if I'm thinking about the kinds of things that can go really wrong really fast, strong acids, when we think about flammable liquids, if you're dealing with flammable liquids, especially class 2, class 1 and class 2 flammable liquids, there's just so much risk associated with them that you may want to put some limits on what your warehouse is willing and has the capability to handle in a safe way. Develop some procedures for how you're going to manage these products that are coming in. Whose job is it to ensure that you have a safety data sheet when it arrives? Where are you going to store it? What are you not going to accept? I think those are things that you probably would want to get down in writing to ensure that it's very clear organization wide, so that you are prepared. And you still want to think hard about what if somebody punctures one of your pallets with a fork, or they're cutting into the wrapping and you end up cutting into a box and cutting into a plastic container? Spill kits, personal protective equipment, those types of emergency response pieces, even though you're a warehouse, still so important. And that before you unload a truck, before you unload a pallet, your staff need to understand the risks of what's on that pallet, ultimately, so that they can protect themselves.
Right. And it would
some
be
of
for
it's
those...
about knowing when to bail. At what point do you're I just poked this with my forklift and now it's leaking and I know that's nitric acid and I need to step away. We need to call the fire department, which is, by the way, not a universal response plan. You need a spill kit. Don't just call the fire department.
Right. And then to clarify too, it would be, the specific training would be for the people that have that potential of exposure. You wouldn't have to train workers that are in the office necessarily, that are never ever going to be exposed to it. So just a clarification there.
Yeah, we also have a question about cytotoxics. And just a quick note, Kimberly, unfortunately, we're not able to share the presentation, but we are, of course, sharing the contents of the presentation, which was really the checklist. So unlike some of our presentations where you're not able to get the slides, what you're actually getting is the checklist that you're going to be able to use back at your own workplace that made up 80% of the deck, which is a huge win. You can download it and use it repeatedly. You can use it more than once, which is great.
Yes.
So you have a question.
It was recorded.
Yeah, it was also recorded.
Also recorded, and it'll be posted. Yep.
Yeah. share that with your friends. Like if you've got someone in your professional network and you found this to be really valuable, feel free to send them the checklist or send them the better yet, send them the link to the checklist so we get the little click when they, when they click on it, and download it. Feel free to send them the link to this webinar. We do have a question from Danielle about cytotoxics. Do cytotoxic medications not prepared or stored within a hospital require an SCS? This means that they're received, prepared, and administered immediately. So one of the interesting things about cytotoxic medications is that cytotoxics are drugs. And drugs are not covered by WHMIS. The Workplace Hazardous Materials Information System exempts products that are regulated by some of our other chemical communication systems. So pesticide products are exempted, wood, tobacco products are, wood products are exempted, tobacco products are exempted. Another thing that is exempted are drugs. They are regulated under the Canada Food and Drug Act. So all of the regulatory pieces that go along with drugs would be separate from WHMIS. However, the elements around site-specific hazards, and by the way, if you are in a healthcare facility, and I mentioned earlier in the chat about Section 130 of the Industrial Establishment Regulation around the requirement to provide training, information, training on spills response, how to don and doff personal protective equipment appropriately. That section is specific to industrial establishments. Healthcare facilities are regulated under a different regulation. That regulation does in fact have a very similar section that does talk about a chemical. It's similar. It's not the same section number. So I would dig through that regulation to go and find the specific section that does specify that. I can also tell you that the healthcare regulation does have some information specifically about cytotoxic drugs. So I would encourage you to look there. Another thing to know is that our sister association, which is PSHSA, the Public Services Health and Safety Association, they specialize in the education sector, the healthcare sector, community services, and municipal services. So if you're looking for something that's you're looking for very specific regulatory guidance about the healthcare regulation, I would encourage you to also hook in with your local consultant with PSHSA that specializes in healthcare specifically. Does that help? Yeah, so you wouldn't necessarily have a safety data sheet. You'd likely have a it's on the tip of my tongue. I was gonna say leaflet, but it's not. It's the list of hazards that come with the drugs. It is like the included leaflet with the drug. You do still need to have information available to your staff. You can't just be like, oh, this is a cytotoxic drug, no information, not providing that. There we go. Thank you, Yvonne. Medical monograph. You can tell that healthcare is not a sector that I've worked in quite a lot. I've worked largely in industrial and government services, so did not come like top of mind, but thank you so much, Yvonne. Fantastic. Yeah, so feel free to hook in with the healthcare experts at PSHSA as well. Cool. All right, it's 12:27. I don't want to take any more of anyone's time. The question and answer sometimes goes well past 12. I hope you've had a fantastic session. If you do have further very specific questions, I would encourage you to reach out to Tony since she was the lead on this webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. We are looking forward to seeing you on March 31st to see how this tool has worked for you, to be that resource for you as you go through your chemical safety journey. And don't hesitate to dig into some of those resources we have for you. And remember that WSPS is here for you every step of the way.
Thanks, Tova. Thanks, everyone, for joining.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. And we look forward to connecting with you on the 31st to see how you did.